Hello, thank you again, Nicole, for sharing your wonderful stories. I'm Gina Tran, product manager at Bitwarden. We have a diverse group of experts on the panel today, and I'm very excited to learn from them and hear their rich perspectives. I'll introduce our panelists, and then we'll get into the swing of things. First off, Dr. Sal Aurigemma is an associate professor of computer information systems at the University of Tulsa. With over a decade of experience in the IT field, his research explores employee information security policy compliance, improving end user and small business information security practices, and end user computing, focusing on business spreadsheet error detection. Next, Dr. Raphael Reischuk is head of Cybersecurity and a distinguished consultant at Zulke, Vice President of the Cybersecurity Committee of Digital Switzerland, and a member of the Cybersecurity Advisory Board of the Swiss Academy of Engineering Sciences, SATW. He is also a founding member of the Swiss National Testing Institute for Cybersecurity, NTC, and in 2021, Raphael was named one of Switzerland's top 100 digital shapers. And our final panelist, Lisa Plagemeyer, is the Interim Executive Director at the National Cybersecurity Alliance. She was previously Chief Strategy Officer for MediaPro, Cybersecurity and Privacy Education, and Chief Evangelist for InfoSec. She also spent 12 years at CDK Global as the Director of Security Culture, Risk, and Client Advocacy. Thank you all for participating, and welcome to the Open Source Security Summit.
Glad to be here.
All right. Yes. To kick things off, this question is directed at the panel. What advice would you give to business leaders that are trying to improve security practices within their employee base? Lisa, let's start with you.
I think we have to stop using FUD, right? We're glass half empty people in the security world. You just have to get on Twitter for 5 minutes to see that. Some of us are get a little grumpy about security, and I'm afraid that comes through in a lot of our communications. We use militaristic language like attacks and threats, and the average person is going to have a fight or flight response to that, and that causes people to disengage. I think we should be selling positivity. We should be talking about the peace of mind you get when you use a password manager, or the convenience or the speed of using one, instead of talking about all the scary reasons why you should use one. Training and awareness programs should be positive and empowering. Education is empowering. Fighting bad guys is empowering if you have the right knowledge to do it. But that's hard for your average security professional because we're just not the most optimistic bunch. So I'm a big advocate for letting the marketing professionals or people with marketing expertise sell people on the positives rather than using hackers and hoodies and language that is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD.
That's such a great perspective. One of our keynote speakers mentioned that we sell on convenience rather than security to users. Raphael, your thoughts?
Well, I think one of the fundamental things is to make people personally concerned about cybersecurity. So it's not good if we know that our neighbors are affected or some businesses are affected. Well, each and every one of us can be affected. And to me, the only way to get this mindset right is to go with the paradigm of hack yourself first. So I have made very positive experiences with getting other hackers hack your organization. This sounds very strange at the beginning, and people are concerned, but you don't tell anybody. You just tell the CEO, or probably not even the CEO, and you just do it. And once you do it, the results are amazing. And depending on the company culture, what you get as a result is people are overwhelmed. They are thankful. They don't blame you for doing that, but instead they tell you this was one of the best exercises we did. And so I totally like this approach of creating awareness, not by telling people, look, this is what you have to do, but instead, look, this has happened to us. And we should be thankful that it was not a real attacker, but that it was just somebody who did that for us. So I think this is the mindset that we need. And at least I have made very positive experiences with this.
Thank you, Raphael. Ian Tien mentioned getting pwned ethically, and I really like that phrase for inviting that into kind of your daily security practice. Dr. Aurigemma, what would you add based on some of your academic research?
So I think Lisa and Raphael are right on point. One of the big things about not hitting just on FUD is overwhelming people in their ability to respond to danger. So do people run away from it, or do they take actions to try to protect themselves? So what Raphael's talking about is making it real, make the threat real so it's not foreign. And what Lisa's talking about in terms of providing that positive support. So, okay, there's a threat, you know it can impact you and your organization. The good news is that you can do things to really mitigate that threat. And if you build that into your training and in your activities and part of your everyday workflow, then your cybersecurity hygiene is going to increase because, well, it becomes something that you can do as opposed to someone else's problem. So I think they're right on point.
That makes sense, right? It's all about building that daily security habit. For Dr. Aurigemma and Raphael, you two come from a long history of academia. How do you think businesses can work with academic institutions so that students can better instill security practices before they enter the workforce? Dr. Aurigemma, we'll start with you.
Okay, so this is kind of like telling on academia a little bit, but I think many universities like mine have good relationships with organizations that employ our students from an HR perspective, but rarely do we get any feedback from employers about what our students are doing well or poorly upon entering the workforce from a security perspective. You know, the openness that academic institutions rely on to thrive in an academic environment, not the most conducive thing to building sound security practices as our students head on. So those of us that teach cybersecurity, and we're much more likely to incorporate knowledge and skills into our curriculum that build better security hygiene, but we're in the minority of classes taught at any university or college. So for instance, I require all of my students to use Bitwarden for real and multi-forms of two-factor authentication for their various projects, whether it's coding, infrastructure, and then any accounts they need to build. But I'm in a minority. I think the best way, in my opinion, for employers to affect what we do in academia in terms of building up our student security hygiene is to provide feedbacks in ways that matter. So nothing speaks louder than a donor organization asking for something in return for their donations, or employers telling an institution that they need to improve student security hygiene in order for continued recruitment. And beyond that, I'll say that businesses that support internships have a lot of influence in preparing students for security expectations when they hit the workforce.
It's great that you set that expectation with your students. It's such a great standard to have as an educator, and a good reminder to continue that partnership between private businesses and higher education. Raphael, what would you add to that?
First of all, I totally support what has been said before. I agree that most of the students, so for instance, we are closely collaborating with ETH Zurich, one of the fantastic schools that we have in the world. And what I see is that people from the academic point of view have questions like, how is business? What are the challenges that you're solving for the customers, for the clients out there? And oftentimes they have no idea. So what we do is we go to the universities and give talks and talk about actual projects, actual problems we have solved for them. And then students start realizing this is far away from what they have been taught in classes. And of course, you need the fundamentals, you need the basics for sure. But reality oftentimes is different, right? For instance, you don't break cryptography, right? You bypass it. Right, and this is something people probably don't learn in a cryptography class. So there's many of these aspects. So I believe a close exchange with the universities is key, and it helps both sides.
That's so true, right? The common phrase is hackers don't break in, they log in. And so whatever we can do to protect ourselves is always better. Dr. Aurigemma, you were awarded the Collins College of Business Mayo Teaching Excellence Award. By 2027, I read the statistic that companies are projected to spend $10 billion on security awareness training, even though with news of every new hack, it shows that it's not always effective. What guidance would you provide on how companies can better teach and educate their employees based on what was effective with your students?
So, okay, I don't think anyone will be surprised to hear that teaching difficult concepts, such as those associated with cybersecurity, it's not cookie cutter where one method is successful for all types of people and learning types. For every class I teach, I need to know my students, their baseline knowledge, their demographic differences, and how they react when they do and do not understand something they're being taught. And don't get me wrong, every student is not a unicorn and needs to be treated completely different. There tends to be different categories of learners and communicators. Now, the same goes for security awareness training in any organization. I mean, I've not come across many organizations that have security awareness training other than one size fits all. And they're surprised that they don't get great results across the spectrum of their workforce. I mean, does your organization capture pre and post training metrics, knowledge metrics, and do you use that to re-examine how you're doing your training? If you don't, you should. And if that sounds like work, yes, but it's work that you should be doing. I mean, I talk to a lot of organizations. They do phishing tests. They go, great. What do you do with that data? We go, we report metrics. We report percentages of people that clicked on the link. And then we talk to them. And I go, great. How's it going? They're like, pretty much the same over time. So clearly we have a problem there in that I think there's some mentality in terms of, hey, I've got a requirement to do security awareness training, but maybe embrace the effort that it takes to really get people to understand your employees and what can make them learn more effectively. How's that for an answer?
That's great. Lisa, similar question. In your LinkedIn, you state, well, what's the difference between user behavior and consumer behavior? Nothing. You talk about using global marketing advertising to sell employees on improving security habits. How can businesses sell on why better security matters?
Well, I completely agree with what was just said. If I take a marketing lens to training and awareness, and having worked in training and awareness for a long time, I'll still admit that most of the content out there is kind of lousy. You have to look really hard to find really great training content, or a lot of folks are creating their own. I think if I was a marketer, I worked at Ford for a long time. So if I'm trying to sell you a Mustang or an F-Series pickup truck, it's not a one size fits all message, as was said, right? Marketers go to great lengths, consumer companies go to great lengths to cohort data and to customize and personalize as much as possible. And I think that's going to be the future of awareness programs. There's lots of tools out there to do that from a corporate comms perspective. And we just haven't gotten to the point where we're leveraging those in security training and awareness yet. So, I was kind of doing some of this manually when I was running a program, because if I've got a software developer who has, I'm looking at the data and I can see that he's read a newsletter article that I put out. He's been to our security portal page on AppSec. And now he's, probably ripe. He's, if I think about it as a sales funnel, I've made him aware, and I'm kind of pulling him or her through that funnel to the point where they say, yeah, you know what? I really want to take OWASP Top 10 training, instead of us pushing that training at that individual, getting them to engage. I had a marketing VP a long time ago who used to say, don't feed them lunch, make them hungry. We have to take that same perspective with training and awareness. So we have a tendency, because we're very passionate about security, we want people to stay safe. We give them all this great advice all at once, and it's overwhelming. And the advice I give to that software developer is going to be very different than the advice I give my mom or my kids. And so I believe that the future looks like a lot more like marketing, where we're personalizing and customizing the messages, the training, the general awareness content, the articles and the information that we put in front of people. The threats to somebody in accounts payable are very different to somebody in HR, to somebody in software development. So the one size fits all approach just isn't working, and the content has to be engaging. I want to see more consumer grade content, something I'd watch or engage with because I want to, because it made me hungry to learn more, not because somebody assigned it to me and there's a compliance deadline and everybody's got to do it.
I really like that theme of personalization and being consumer grade, right? I think everyone's guilty of just skipping through the modules just to hit that checklist for the IT department, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense. Lisa, switching gears. So every October, the National Cybersecurity Alliance works with the U.S.'s Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency to drive education via a campaign called Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Based on your tenure, what industry changes have you seen in driving cybersecurity awareness?
Yeah, before I was the executive director, I was on the board for a few years and running training awareness programs, and we leveraged all the resources from the National Cybersecurity Alliance to run a Cybersecurity Awareness Month campaign at the company where I worked. We're seeing more and more engagement. If we look at, from a marketing perspective, all the sort of numbers that you would track, so social media followers, visitors to our website, people signing up to be a champion every October, those numbers are up consistently year after year after year. We're also changing our focus at the NCA to be to communicate a little bit more to the consumer public, and we're getting good engagement from consumers and from the mainstream press. So no matter how you feel about the mainstream media these days, I think you can still say that they have their finger on the pulse of topics that people want to hear about. And there's been an appetite to learn more about staying safe online. And we've, as we do our media pitches, of course, we differentiate. As I discussed, we talk to, parents trying to protect their kids during back to school time, or middle-aged folks like me with aging parents just trying to, stop their mom from clicking on everything she sees. So the more we tailor the message to specific demographic groups, the more engagement we see. And those trends are definitely up year over year. I think we still have a ways to go. We did a report this year called "Oh Behave" about end user behavior. It's available on our website, staysafeonline.org, and it's all about people's beliefs and attitudes about security. And we learned a lot. Specifically on the topic of password managers, we learned that people would rather write their passwords down in a notebook. And when we asked people why they don't use password managers, they said it's because they don't trust them. So we still have a lot of communicating to do. We need to change that consumer perception. And I mean, we're seeing more and more engagement, with things like when the pipeline attack happened, our social media followers jumped. We're going through a website project to completely redo our website so that it's much easier for the average consumer to get plain spoken information about these complex topics, so that they have a place to go where we can explain things in layman's terms. So look for more of that to come from us. And we do see more engagement year over year, as we're reporting to CISA this week, actually, on the results from this past October.
The statistics are great to hear, that general uptick.
Mm-hmm.
Raphael, you're also involved in industry alliances of the public sector. How would you describe your working relationship with the Switzerland government?
So Switzerland is in a interesting position for various reasons. So first of all, we got snow, as you can see in the background, and I also brought a fire. So because people were complaining there was no fire, the fireside chat. No, seriously. So the situation in Switzerland is that we are a small country, I would say, but with an enormous impact, so with an enormous visibility. And one of the facts that makes Switzerland different, and also the relationship to government and to democratic processes, is our direct democracy. This is a fundamental difference that many people do not understand if they have not lived in Switzerland for some time. For instance, in the European Union, the system is totally different, and these are our direct neighbors, but still people have issues or hard time understanding what that means. So to explain, our citizens participate in the democratic processes. They decide if they like e-voting or not. They decide how the electronic identifier should be designed, or what kind of approach we like or not. So this is the main difference. So the participation is much higher, I would claim, compared to other countries. And also this makes the education, brings the education to a different level. And also the interest in those topics is just increased, because people are dealing with the topic. They're discussing this topic openly, which is a nice thing. So this is about the citizens. For the government, we have a close relationship, and one reason is, as I mentioned, Switzerland is smaller than many other countries. That makes things easier. But at the same time, I would say government cannot afford to do something in a silo on their own. Because of the direct democracy, people are willing to exchange ideas. So there's a lot of discussion. We have good contact to our politicians. For instance, our politicians oftentimes are taking public trains, etc. So you can meet them on the street. It's kind of a different situation, and we need to keep this culture as a society. to discuss in very polite terms and open terms about the topics. And we must not lose this cultural asset, I would call it. So this is probably one of the reasons why we have probably a better discussion on many topics. Probably not the best that we could have, but it's an important differentiator, I would say.
It's a great culture, right? That kind of open discussion, you kind of have that discourse, even if there might be some give and take on how we present ideas. So, all right, last question for the panel, and I'd be remiss not to ask this at the Open Source Security Summit. How do you see open source software and security coming together? What are the benefits and upsides to businesses? Dr. Sal Aurigemma, we'll start with you.
Well, I use open source security applications in pretty much all of my classes. And in much of my research, the resources that are out there, the community that are providing these tools, it's not just an application to do encryption or to do password management or multi-factor authentication. It provides an opportunity to educate people on how to use these different technological tools that can help us secure and move our organizations forward. So I enjoy using open source tools in particular because there's usually a community that comes with it that is there to help people and to try to get them to overcome the challenges they're coming across. Now, when we have our employers come and talk to our students and they'll talk about, okay, what kind of applications and firewalls and programming and what kind of things you use, we try to stay away from the proprietary stuff to go, listen, they can understand the fundamentals of a firewall because we're using pfSense. They can understand how a password manager works because they use Bitwarden. They can understand how different VPNs work because we're using WireGuard. So what we're doing is we're taking these foundational elements of cybersecurity that are baked into these tools, showing our students how to use them, and then explaining to them that, hey, these private companies that are out there, they're taking these same fundamental concepts and they're packaging them in a way to maybe make it a little bit easier to be deployed in an organization as it moves forward. So in the future, I see more and more emphasis, especially on the training perspective of getting people up to speed. So Lisa talked about filling that gap a little bit in cybersecurity jobs and awareness. I think open source security tools have a huge place in preparing the future workforce, whether it be students or people transitioning from different career fields, to understand what it's going to take to help secure the nation and the world moving forward. So I think without open source security tools, we're at a significant disadvantage. So we need more of them. We need good documentation. We need communities that keep supporting those tools and that spirit of giving and sharing and helping each other out.
Great. Lisa?
You've got me thinking about how we explain this to the end consumer. It doesn't matter. I see somebody in the comments said, the WIFM, what's in it for me? And I think when I think about the funnel, when I think about, awareness and interest and getting somebody to the point where they actually say, okay, you've convinced me I need to use the password manager. Now, which one do I use? I think that's where the message comes in at what open source might mean to the end consumer at that point. But when I think about the consumer problem that we've got right now, it's top of funnel. It's awareness that these solutions exist and that they're, getting rid of this perception of why people don't trust password managers. And so as I think about open source and educating and just general security education for the general public, I think we have to be really careful that we don't overwhelm people with detail that might not be necessary until they're kind of further into the process of thinking, okay, I'm convinced I need one of these things. So I think the work that we have to do at the NCA is really just raising overall awareness. And then for industry folks like you guys to get into sort of the features and benefits once somebody's made the decision that they're ready to use the technology.
It's a great point about not leading with technology, but leading with benefits, right, and not overwhelming consumers. Raphael, your thoughts?
Yeah. So for me, open source is the fundamental prerequisite for getting security right. It's a necessary, but it's unfortunately not a sufficient condition. So for instance, GitHub just last year has published a report in which they said that on average, it takes an open source software, a vulnerability in open source software, roughly 218 weeks before being disclosed. So this is just over 4 years, right? So it's the number is not great, but if you have closed software, well, then you are in a much worse situation for sure. And this is actually one of the reasons, and you mentioned it in the beginning, why I founded with colleagues the National Test Institute for Cybersecurity, because I'm sure that private testing companies will not get access to appropriate closed software for many companies. So, and I hope that we as a National Institute get access to critical systems, or like systems that are in use all over the world. For instance, Microsoft Teams is a perfect example, right? It's not open sourced, and people are using it worldwide, and we would like to understand what is going on there. So for me, open source is really key, but unfortunately not all players are there yet. And I guess it will take us quite some time until we get this right. And there was one question from Don I would like to answer. Is the direct democracy only workable in a small country? And I guess no. It's a question of history and how you get there. This is the fundamental challenge, probably.
All right, thank you. And that concludes our panel. Thanks again to Dr. Sal Aurigemma, Dr. Raphael Reischik, and Lisa Plagemeyer for sharing your expertise with us.